The freezing wind howls, tearing at Eliza's tattered clothes as her children shiver, nearing death. "We can't go on, Mama. Please," a child cries. Their community exiled them, sealing their doom. But a silent watcher, hidden in the shadows, sees a mysterious detail about their survival. What this mountain man does next changes everything. Eliza had always known hardship, a constant companion since her youth. Life in dry waters had demanded resilience, a quiet strength forged in the unforgiving daily grind of a land that yielded little. She had raised her children with what meager resources she possessed, teaching them the value of a hard day's labor and the warmth of a shared meal, however simple. Her eldest, a boy, barely a man, already carried the weight of responsibility in his young eyes, helping his mother tend their small garden patch, a defiant pocket of green against the arid landscape. The younger ones, a chorus of laughter and innocent questions, were her anchors, her reason for enduring. She dreamt of a life beyond the village's confines, a place where their future wasn't dictated by the whims of nature or the cold hearts of men. But that dream had remained a distant flicker, a silent prayer. Yet, even in her quiet determination, Eliza had sensed the growing chill from her neighbors. A persistent ailment, a fever that swept through dry waters claiming the weak and terrifying the strong, had turned their gaze upon her family. Her own husband had succumbed to its icy grip months prior, leaving her to face the town's suspicion alone. She saw the fear-filled eyes, the hurried crossing of paths, the muttered prayers when she passed. They searched for a reason, a scapegoat, for their suffering, and found it in the solitary widow and her vulnerable brood. Their accusations, cloaked in piety and fear, branded her as the carrier of their misfortune, a convenient target for a community grappling with its own despair. The very air around her had grown thick with unspoken judgment, making every breath a struggle. The council's pronouncement had been swift, brutal, and devoid of mercy. Gathered in the dusty square under the unforgiving glare of the midday sun, Eliza had stood, her children clinging to her skirts as the words of banishment echoed like hammer blows against her heart. They spoke of cleansing, of protecting the village, of ancient traditions. But Eliza saw only the raw terror in their eyes, a terror so profound it twisted their humanity into something monstrous. No appeals were heard, no pleas considered. Their minds were made up, their conviction as unyielding as the rock face of the mountains that loomed over their valley. The dark forest, they reasoned, would be a swift and silent executioner, delivering them from the curse with an efficiency no man could match. As the sun began its descent, casting long skeletal shadows across the land, Eliza clutched her children closer, their small hands gripping her own with a desperate strength. Their journey began not with a tearful farewell, but with the stony silence of a town that had already buried them in its mind. The path they took was one less traveled, leading away from the familiar dirt tracks and into the encroaching wilderness. The last glimpse Eliza had of dry waters was a cluster of buildings, dark and uninviting, receding into the distance, a place that had promised community but delivered only condemnation. Her heart ached with a pain far deeper than any physical wound, a testament to the profound betrayal she had endured. She walked, one foot in front of the other, each step an act of defiance against the decree that sought to erase them. Her youngest, a mere toddler, rode upon her hip, his small body a warm, heavy weight against her dwindling strength. The others, their small legs already weary, stumbled along, their wide, frightened eyes constantly scanning the deepening shadows. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the dust of the village. Ahead, the forest loomed, a vast, dark wall, its ancient trees whispering secrets to the wind. It was a world entirely unknown, a domain of untamed forces where the comforts of man were nothing but fleeting memories. Eliza knew that with every step deeper into its embrace, they were moving further from any hope of rescue, any whisper of human kindness. The vastness of the land, once a distant promise of adventure, now felt like an endless maw, waiting to swallow them whole. Their fate, once declared by men, now lay solely in the hands of the wild, and as the last sliver of daylight vanished behind the distant peaks, Eliza felt an icy tendril of despair wrap around her heart. What waited for them in the impenetrable darkness of the wilderness was a question that would haunt her dreams and test the very limits of her resolve. The journey into the untamed heart of the wilderness was a chronicle of mounting desperation, each arduous step taking Eliza and her children further from the meager solace of human contact. The path, barely more than an animal trail, twisted and turned through a landscape that grew increasingly hostile. Towering pines, their branches thick with needles, formed an oppressive canopy, stealing the daylight and plunging them into a perpetual twilight. The air, once merely cool, now carried a biting chill that seeped into their bones, a precursor to the unforgiving mountain nights. Eliza, her strength already eroded by grief and the village's unkindness, felt a profound exhaustion settle upon her, a leaden weight that threatened to pin her to the earth. Each rustle in the undergrowth, each distant howl of a creature unseen, sent a fresh wave of terror through the small, huddled group. The children, their faces pale and streaked with dirt, clung to her, their small hands grasping for reassurance she barely possessed. Their wide, fearful eyes mirrored her own internal dread, amplifying the crushing burden of responsibility. She knew that any faltering on her part would mean certain doom for them all. The thought spurred her onward, but the physical toll was immense. Her legs ached, her lungs burned with the effort, and a gnawing hunger had begun to hollow out her stomach. Yet she had to be their rock, their shield against the encroaching wildness. The dark forest itself seemed a living entity, an implacable judge of their forced exodus. Its silence was not peaceful, but heavy and watchful, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind through the pines or the sudden snap of a twig underfoot. Eliza found herself talking to the children in hushed tones, telling them stories of warmth and comfort, trying to conjure a world where this nightmare did not exist. But even her voice, usually a soothing balm, now seemed thin and fragile against the vast, indifferent expanse. She carried the youngest, his head nestled against her shoulder, while the others, whimpering softly, trailed behind, their spirits flagging with every passing hour. As the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in fleeting streaks of bruised purple and orange, the cold intensified. Eliza's breath plumed in the frigid air, and her fingers, numb with cold, struggled to maintain a firm grip on the child she carried. She scanned the dense woods, desperate for any sign of shelter, a small cave, an overhang, anything to offer even a temporary respite from the raw, biting wind. But there was nothing, only the unending, skeletal embrace of the trees. It was a desolation so profound it felt as though the very air had stolen the warmth from her soul. A flicker of something unusual, however, caught her eye amidst the uniformity of the trees. On the rough bark of an old pine, slightly obscured by clinging moss, she noticed a mark. It wasn't the natural scar of lightning or the gnawing of a creature, but a series of 3 deep, parallel lines, crudely carved, yet too deliberate to be accidental. It was a sign she didn't recognize, unlike any trail marker she had ever seen, and certainly not something found naturally in the wild. A prickle of unease traced its way down her spine. It seemed almost too convenient, this faint, almost imperceptible carving, placed exactly at a fork in the path, guiding them deeper into the shadows, almost as if someone had intended for them to take this specific perilous route. It was a thought quickly dismissed, a product of her fear-addled mind, yet the image of the strange mark lingered, an unsettling question in the back of her mind. The disaster that Dry Waters had planned for them seemed to unfold with chilling precision. Eliza felt her own strength ebbing away, a slow, inevitable drain. A cough racked her body, tearing at her chest, and a feverish chill began to set in despite the physical exertion. Her legs, once sturdy and reliable, began to tremble uncontrollably, threatening to give way beneath her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the mountain air, that she could not go on much longer. The faces of her children, their eyes filled with a desperate plea for hope, were the only thing that kept her upright. But even the fiercest will has its breaking point. As the last embers of twilight faded, leaving them encased in a suffocating darkness, Eliza stumbled. Her foot caught on an unseen root, and the fragile balance she had maintained for so long finally shattered. With a gasped cry, she collapsed to her knees, the toddler tumbling from her arms into the soft pine needles beside her. Her vision blurred, the towering trees swimming before her eyes. The cold earth pressed against her cheek, and the scent of damp pine became overwhelming. She lay there, utterly spent, her body refusing to obey. Her children gathered around her, their small voices rising in a chorus of terrified whimpers, tugging at her clothes, pleading for her to rise. But Eliza could not. She had reached the absolute zenith of her weakness, a desolate moment where hope was not merely an illusion, but a forgotten word. As consciousness began to slip away, she was aware only of the deepening cold, the rising panic of her children, and a chilling certainty that, from the profound depths of the forest, eyes unseen were now watching their tragic tableau unfold. From the profound echoing silence of the dark forest, a figure emerged, more specter than man to the distant villagers, whose very existence was rooted in myth and whispered legend. This was Silas, the mountain man, whose life was intrinsically woven into the fabric of the wild. He had observed the unfolding tragedy from the deep shadows, a silent witness to the cruel hand of man and the unforgiving embrace of nature. For days he had tracked them, not with the intent of a hunter, but with the quiet contemplation of one who understood the language of the wilderness better than any man. He read the story of their suffering in the broken twigs, the scuffed earth, and the remnants of their dwindling provisions, a narrative of human cruelty etched onto the face of the mountain. Silas was not one for idle words. His actions spoke with the resonant clarity of an ancient forest. To him, the forest was not merely a collection of trees and stones, but a sacred sanctuary, a place of balance and stark, undeniable truth. The suffering of the innocent, particularly of children, was a desecration of that truth, an unnatural scar upon the pristine face of his world, a deep, quiet empathy, long forgotten by the society that had cast Eliza out, stirred within him. Yet, he did not rush to offer immediate salvation. Instead, he maintained a vigilant, silent watch, a guardian from the unseen. He left subtle markers, a small pile of gathered firewood near a sheltered alcove, a perfectly snared rabbit, fresh and tender, placed discreetly on a fallen log. He watched Eliza's resilience, the fierce maternal love that propelled her onward, even as her body failed, recognizing in her a spirit as wild and unyielding as the mountain peaks themselves. When Eliza finally succumbed, her body ravaged by exhaustion and fever, Silas knew his time for observation was over. The chill of the mountain night threatened to claim them all. With a quiet efficiency born of years in the wild, he moved through the darkness, a shadow among shadows. He scooped up the youngest child, a tiny bundle of shivering innocence, then gently but firmly roused the older children. Their eyes, wide with fear and confusion, stared up at him, a towering, silent figure materializing from the gloom. He communicated not with words, but with a silent, unwavering command in his steady gaze, urging them to follow. They stumbled after him, their small frames shivering, drawn by the sheer force of his presence. He led them through the inky blackness, navigating the treacherous terrain with an innate sense that left no doubt of his mastery over this world. The air grew perceptibly warmer, carrying the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke. And then, through a veil of snow-dusted pines, a light glowed, a beacon in the vast, indifferent darkness. It was his refuge, a cabin he had built with his own hands, nestled deep within a sheltered hollow, a rude, solitary dwelling, yet now, for them, a beacon of hope. The interior of the cabin was a stark contrast to the unforgiving wild outside. A roaring fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls and filling the small space with a dry, comforting warmth. Eliza, half-conscious, was gently laid upon a bed of furs near the fire, her breathing shallow and ragged. The children, eyes wide with awe and apprehension, huddled together, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Silas moved with practiced ease, his movements economical and silent, fetching water, stirring a pot over the flames. He was a reclusive figure, his life a symphony of solitude. And now, this quiet sanctuary was invaded by the sudden clamor of new life, the soft whimpers of children, and the frail breaths of a dying woman. He watched Eliza, his gaze piercing, assessing. Her face was pale, her lips chapped, but even in her unconscious state he sensed the same indomitable spirit he had observed from afar. He saw not a burden, but a testament to resilience. It was then, as the last vestiges of the city's judgment faded into the background and the pure urgency of their shared struggle against the wilderness settled upon them, that he spoke. His voice, deep and resonant, was a low rumble in the quiet cabin, cutting through the fear and uncertainty. He wasn't offering charity as a stranger might, but a stark, undeniable decree. The mountain demanded work, vigilance, and respect for its brutal laws. His sanctuary was not a haven of comfort, but a place of survival, where every life had purpose, every hand held value. He offered not a transient kindness, but a new truth, a new existence. He stood over her, his eyes fixed on her still, fragile form, and declared the profound truth that would forever alter their paths. He spoke not of conditions or demands, but of an undeniable reality, a new covenant forged in the unforgiving crucible of the mountain. His words, though few, carried the weight of a solemn oath, a defiant challenge to the fate that men had intended for them. The harsh silence of his reclusive life was now irrevocably broken, replaced by a fierce new purpose. He extended not a hand of comfort, but the promise of a sanctuary, a life earned through utility, and an unwavering respect for the savage, beautiful rules of that wild, magnificent place. And then, he said, his voice imbued with the unwavering certainty of the mountain itself, "You will stay here, but know that the mountain asks for everything in return. There is no pity in these peaks, only strength, and if you are to live, you will become part of it." He looked at the children, then back at Eliza, the warmth of the fire flickering in his piercing eyes. The challenge was laid bare. In the raw, unyielding world of Silas's mountain refuge, Eliza's recovery was a slow, arduous climb from the brink. The fever raged for days, her breath a shallow, rasping sound in the quiet cabin, while Silas, with a stoic dedication, tended to her. He brewed strong, bitter teas from mountain herbs, their scent filling the small space, and kept the fire roaring, chasing away the chill that clung to her weakened body. The children, initially wary of the imposing, silent man, learned to move with quiet deference, their small lives now dictated by his presence and the rhythms of the mountain. They observed him, with a mixture of fear and fascination, the youngest often watching him with wide, unblinking eyes as he mended traps or sharpened tools by the firelight. As Eliza slowly regained her strength, the true nature of Silas's world began to reveal itself. This was no place for idleness or sentimentality. Survival was a daily, demanding task. Silas, a master of his domain, taught them the harsh realities of their new existence. He showed the eldest boy how to set snares, how to track game in the snow, his movements precise and economical, communicating more through gesture and example than words. The girls learned to gather kindling, to identify edible berries and roots, their small hands growing accustomed to the rough textures of bark and moss. Eliza, though still frail, insisted on contributing, her fierce independence refusing to be sidelined. She learned to mend clothing with animal sinew, to stretch and cure hides, her nimble fingers, once accustomed to finer fabrics, now adapting to the rugged demands of mountain life. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the cabin began to transform. Eliza's touch, gentle yet firm, started to soften the edges of Silas's austere existence. Before her arrival, the dwelling had been a place of pure function, a stark refuge for one man. Now, it began to acquire the faint, sweet scent of simmering stews, the muted warmth of neatly folded furs, and the quiet hum of a nascent home. She brought order to the chaos of survival, a domesticity that Silas had long forgone. She found ways to make the coarse furs more comfortable, to organize his scattered tools, to turn the simple, often bland meals into something nourishing and even palatable. Her quiet efficiency, her unwavering determination to provide for her children and contribute to their new sanctuary, began to chip away at Silas's solitary resolve. He would often find himself watching her, a flicker of something akin to curiosity, perhaps even respect, in his usually impassive eyes. One crisp, clear morning, as Eliza meticulously mended a tear in a deer hide with painstaking precision, an unexpected challenge arose. The youngest child, drawn by the sparkling ice on a nearby stream, ventured too close and slipped, his small leg twisting at an unnatural angle. A piercing scream tore through the mountain's quiet. Silas, alerted by the sudden sound, rushed out, his face etched with concern. The boy's leg was clearly broken, an injury that in the depths of winter could prove fatal without proper care. Eliza, despite her own inner panic, moved with a surprising calm. She had once, in dry waters, helped a neighbor set a broken arm, drawing on old, forgotten remedies passed down through generations. Silas, for all his wilderness wisdom, had little experience with such delicate injuries. He knew how to mend a broken trap, but a child's fragile bone was another matter. He watched, a silent observer, as Eliza took charge. She quickly assessed the injury, then, with a resolute strength he hadn't fully appreciated, began to gather specific herbs, wintergreen for pain, comfrey for healing, from a small pouch she had kept. She fashioned a splint from 2 sturdy pieces of bark and strips of leather, her hands moving with a precise, almost instinctive skill. As she worked, murmuring soft, comforting words to her terrified son, Silas saw not just a mother's love, but a deep inherent knowledge, a quiet power that transcended the physical. It was not the brute strength of a man, but the nurturing wisdom of a woman, a quality he had long believed irrelevant in his harsh world. When Eliza finally finished, her face pale but determined, the boy's leg was securely splinted, and he lay whimpering softly, but no longer screaming. Silas looked at the makeshift splint, then at Eliza, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. Her unique ability was not in wielding an axe or setting a trap, but in mending the delicate, in transforming a place of mere survival into a haven of care and healing. She was not just making his cabin a dwelling, she was making it a home. Her quiet resilience, her profound compassion, and her practical knowledge of healing were the very things that were subtly, yet profoundly, changing the lonely landscape of his life. Yet as the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of deep crimson, a new, unforeseen challenge arose. A low, guttural growl followed by a heavy thud echoed from just beyond the cabin walls. The distinct, terrifying scent of a large predator, one that had been absent from their territory for weeks, now hung heavy in the crisp, cold air. Silas's eyes narrowed, his hand instinctively going to the rifle above the hearth. The fragile peace they had begun to build was now abruptly, brutally shattered by the return of a formidable and ancient threat. The growl that tore through the evening air was primal, a deep rumble that vibrated through the very logs of the cabin, instantly silencing the children's whispers. It was the sound of a grizzled mountain bear, a territorial beast that Silas knew intimately. This wasn't merely a hungry animal, it was a ghost from his past, an older male he'd encountered years ago, whose cunning was matched only by its ferocity. Its return, after months of absence, was ill-timed and perilous, especially with a child injured and the family still fragile. Silas's hand went to his rifle, his expression grim. This was a battle for their sanctuary, a test of his resolve to protect the foundlings he had taken under his wing. He moved to the door, peering through a narrow slit, his eyes scanning the deepening shadows. The bear was massive, its shaggy coat blending with the twilight. It circled the cabin, its heavy paws crunching on the frozen earth, a predatory intelligence in its eyes. Silas knew the creature too well. It was not merely curious, but staking a claim, challenging his presence. He had faced it before, a lone hunter against a solitary beast. But now, the stakes were immeasurably higher. Eliza, her face pale but resolute, carefully moved the children away from the door, hushing their terrified whimpers. Her eldest son, his small face reflecting a mixture of fear and determination, gripped a small hunting knife, trying to appear brave. Silas knew brute force alone would be dangerous. A wounded bear was a whirlwind of destruction. He needed a strategy, a way to scare it off without endangering those inside. His mind raced, calculating distances, wind direction, the animal's patterns. He considered firing a warning shot, but knew it might only enrage the beast further. The tension in the small cabin was palpable, a suffocating blanket of dread. Suddenly, Eliza, her voice low but clear, spoke. She pointed to a small leather pouch hanging near the fire, one she had brought from Dry Waters, filled with dried herbs and powders. "The old women in town," she whispered. "They spoke of a way to ward off predators. A powerful scent, smoke infused with bitter root and wild sage. My mother used it once to keep wolves from our sheep." Silas turned, his gaze questioning. He was a man of the mountain, relying on steel and skill, not old wives' tales. But there was a desperate calm in Eliza's eyes, a conviction that resonated with his own instinct for survival. With little time for doubt, Silas allowed her to act. Eliza, despite her weakness, moved swiftly. She crushed the dried roots and sage leaves, mixing them with pine resin and throwing the pungent concoction onto the fire. Thick, acrid smoke immediately filled the cabin, stinging their eyes and nostrils. Then, with a gesture, she directed Silas to open the small smoke vent above the hearth, letting the billowing, bitter fumes drift out into the night air. The effect was almost immediate. The bear, which had been sniffing suspiciously at the cabin walls, suddenly reared back, its massive head shaking violently. It let out a frustrated growl, its keen sense of smell overwhelmed by the unfamiliar, offensive odor. It took a few hesitant steps back, then another, its powerful body turning slowly away from the cabin. With one last defiant roar, it lumbered off into the deeper woods, its heavy footsteps receding into the quiet night. The cabin remained filled with the acrid smoke, but the immediate danger had passed. As the last echoes of the bear's retreat faded, a profound silence descended, broken only by the crackling fire and the children's hushed breaths. The tension, which had held them in its vice-like grip, slowly began to dissipate, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. Silas turned to Eliza, his eyes, usually so guarded, now alight with a dawning comprehension. Her wisdom, born not of brute strength, but of an ancient, intuitive knowledge, had saved them. He saw the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the quiet strength that had allowed her to transform his cabin from a place of mere survival into a refuge, a true home. In the aftermath, as the smoke slowly cleared, something shifted between them. The external threat, though vanquished, had forged a new, unbreakable bond. He saw her not just as a charge to protect, but as an equal, a partner in the brutal dance of survival. And then, as the fire settled into a gentle glow, the unspoken truths began to surface. Silas, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, confessed the weight of his own past, the loss of his family to a mountain avalanche years ago, the reason for his solitary existence, his self-imposed exile. He spoke of the guilt, the raw grief that had driven him deep into the wilderness, where he believed he could never again face such loss. Eliza, in turn, spoke of her own abandonment, the cold cruelty of Dry Waters, the fear that had driven her into the arms of a loveless marriage for security, only to be cast out when she needed protection most. She confessed the quiet despair that had consumed her after her husband's death, the terrifying realization that she was utterly alone in a world that deemed her disposable. Their individual wounds, once born in isolating silence, were now laid bare, shared in the flickering firelight. It was a raw, honest exchange, cementing their partnership not as a mountain man and a refugee, but as two outcasts, two souls battered by life, finding solace and strength in their mutual vulnerabilities. They were two broken halves discovering that together they might just be whole. But even as this profound connection was forged, the lingering scent of danger remained. The bear might have retreated, but the mountain always held new tests. As Silas looked out into the moonless night, a flicker of movement in the distant tree line caught his eye. Not the lumbering gait of a beast, but the unmistakable shadowed silhouette of a human figure. It was brief, almost imperceptible, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. A new kind of chill, far more unsettling than the cold, traced its way down his spine. The wilderness, he knew, held its own dangers, but the true threat, the one that lingered even after the animal retreated, was always the one that wore a human face. With the bear's retreat and the raw confessions shared, a new chapter began within the rugged walls of Silas's cabin. The air, once thick with tension, now hummed with a quiet, burgeoning understanding. This was a fragile peace, earned through shared fear and mutual respect. Eliza and Silas, two souls scarred by different pasts, found themselves forming an unspoken partnership, built on the foundations of shared survival and burgeoning trust. The wilderness, usually a relentless adversary, seemed to offer a brief, fragile reprieve, allowing them to nurture the nascent bonds that had begun to form. Days turned into weeks, each one weaving their lives closer together. Silas, no longer the solitary hunter, found a quiet satisfaction in teaching the children the ways of the mountain. He showed them how to identify different tracks in the snow, how to read the subtle signs of changing weather, how to wield a small axe for kindling. The eldest boy, eager and quick, absorbed every lesson, his young eyes fixed on Silas with an admiration that bordered on reverence. He learned the rhythm of the forest, the language of the wind, and the silent patience required to survive. Eliza, meanwhile, brought her own unique wisdom to their mountain sanctuary. She turned their meager provisions into hearty meals, her hands deftly preparing game and wild roots. She taught the younger children simple songs and stories by the firelight, her voice, soft and melodic, filling the cabin with a warmth it had never known. She mended their worn clothing, patching holes with scraps of fur and leather, transforming their utilitarian attire into something more comfortable, more personal. Silas, often observing from the corner of the cabin, found himself appreciating the quiet domesticity she brought, the subtle ways she transformed his stark existence into a true home. He began to see the mountain through her eyes, a place of not just harsh survival, but of hidden beauty and unexpected bounty. Their evenings became a ritual of shared warmth and companionship. Around the crackling fire, the children would listen, captivated, as Silas, with rare words, recounted tales of the mountain, of its ancient secrets and its powerful creatures. Eliza, in turn, shared stories of dry waters, not of its cruelty, but of the simple joys of community life, of harvests and celebrations, of the human connection they had left behind. These moments, quiet and unassuming, were the bedrock of their growing family, solidifying their connection not just as protectors and protected, but as individuals who found strength and solace in each other's presence. One evening, as Eliza was sorting through a small collection of items she had managed to carry from dry waters, she found a tarnished silver locket, a cherished heirloom from her own mother. As she cleaned it, revealing an intricate, almost forgotten carving on its surface, Silas, watching from his perch by the fire, suddenly stirred. He reached for a small, leather-bound pouch he always kept close, a relic of his own past. From it, he pulled out a similar locket, its design remarkably akin to Eliza's. Though simpler, more weathered by time. A hushed silence fell over the cabin. Both lockets bore the distinct, stylized engraving of a mountain flower, a species unique to these high peaks, known for its resilience in the harshest conditions. It was a symbol he had only ever seen on his mother's side of the family, a mark of an old, almost forgotten mountain clan. Eliza, her eyes wide with wonder, traced the familiar pattern on her own locket. Her mother, she realized, had spoken of a distant branch of their family, a line that had settled deep in the mountains generations ago, a connection long since severed by the vast distances and the passage of time. The revelation was profound. Their destinies, it seemed, had not merely converged by chance, but were intricately woven. Their ancestral roots subtly entwined, connecting them through generations to this very mountain. It was a discovery that bound them not just by circumstance, but by an ancient, almost predestined thread, deepening their bond with a sense of inevitability. They were not merely two outcasts finding refuge. They were two parts of a greater forgotten whole, drawn together by the mountain itself. Yet as the last rays of twilight kissed the snowy peaks, casting long, purple shadows across the valley, the fragile peace was brutally shattered. The eldest child, who had ventured just beyond the cabin to retrieve some fallen firewood, burst back through the door, his young face pale with terror. His eyes were wide and his breath came in ragged gasps. He pointed a trembling finger towards the distant pass that led to the valley below. "Smoke," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Many fires. And men." Silas rushed to the small window, his gaze piercing the fading light. There, in the far distance, a faint, undeniable plume of smoke spiraled into the cold evening sky, accompanied by the distant, almost imperceptible gleam of flickering campfires. It was a sight that promised not travelers, but an organized force, an intrusion that bespoke of danger, a direct threat to the sanctuary they had so painstakingly built. The wilderness had given them solace, but now, the world they had fled was coming for them, its shadow stretching long and menacing across their newfound home. The faint plume of smoke and the distant glint of campfires confirmed their worst fears. The outside world, the very world that had cast Eliza and her children out, had found them. It was a stark, undeniable threat, not of nature's making, but of human design. Silas, his face hardening into a mask of grim determination, knew instinctively what it meant. This was not a random party of hunters or trappers. The organized nature of the distant fires spoke of a concerted effort, a deliberate pursuit. And in his gut, he knew they were coming for Eliza, driven by the same fear and ignorance that had led to her banishment. His sanctuary, once a haven of solitude, was now a potential battleground. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of terror and grim realization. Her past, the one she had desperately tried to outrun, had finally caught up. It was the men from Dry Waters, led perhaps by the self-righteous elders or the vengeful few who still believed her to be a harbinger of ill fortune. They would not seek to harm Silas, for he was a legend, a force of nature in their minds. No, their target was her, a woman they considered property, a problem to be eradicated or reclaimed. Her new identity, forged in the crucible of the mountains, was now fiercely tested. She was no longer merely a victim. She was a defender of her children and of the fragile home they had built with Silas. Silas moved with a practiced urgency, securing the cabin, checking his rifle and traps. He spoke in low, clipped tones, instructing the eldest boy to keep the younger children quiet and hidden, explaining the dangers with a gravity that left no room for childish whims. He prepared for a siege, for a desperate defense of their home. But Eliza knew a direct confrontation would be disastrous. Silas, formidable as he was, could not stand against many armed men, not with 5 children to protect. She saw the unwavering resolve in his eyes, the fierce possessiveness with which he now guarded his new family, and a terrible realization dawned upon her. To save them, she might have to sacrifice herself. As the night wore on, the distant fires grew closer, their flickering glow a menacing promise on the horizon. The air grew tense, thick with the unspoken dread of what the morning would bring. Silas, ever vigilant, stood guard by the small window, his gaze fixed on the mountain pass. Eliza, watching him, felt a profound wave of gratitude, but also a rising tide of despair. He would fight for her, for them, until his last breath. But that was a sacrifice she could not bear. In the dead of night, as Silas briefly stepped outside to check their perimeter, a chilling whisper found its way into the cabin. It was the voice of the eldest boy, who, unseen by Eliza, had followed Silas on one of his patrols earlier in the day. "Mama," he murmured, his voice trembling, "I saw a man, not with the others. He was alone by the old hunting trail, and he carried a different kind of rifle, like the one Father used. Eliza's blood ran cold. Her husband's old rifle, a unique custom-made piece, had been stolen from their home just before her banishment, a detail she had always found unsettling. The boy's words suggested not just an external threat, but a deeper, more personal betrayal. The main threat was not merely the fearful villagers. There was a specific, predatory hand at play, a hidden agenda, perhaps orchestrated by someone closer to her past than she had ever imagined. The first faint rays of dawn brought with them the sound of approaching hoofbeats and the shouts of men. Eliza knew her time was running out. Silas returned to the cabin, his face grim. "They're here," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Many of them." Eliza looked at her children, their small faces pale with terror, then at Silas, his eyes blazing with a protective fury. She knew what she had to do. With a sudden, decisive movement, she pushed Silas back, forcing him away from the door. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, though laced with the deepest despair. "You cannot fight them. Not with the children here. They want me. Let them take me. You must stay and protect them." She understood the profound sacrifice she was making, the wrenching agony of leaving her children, of giving herself back to the very people who had condemned her. But she saw no other way. To save her new family, to ensure that Silas could continue to be their protector, she would offer herself up, a lamb to the wolves. It was a choice born of selfless love, a desperate bid for time, and a heart-wrenching plunge into mortal danger. As the first heavy knock echoed on the cabin door, Eliza took a deep breath, preparing to step out into the harsh glare of judgment, leaving behind the only true home she had ever known. The heavy knocking on the cabin door resonated through the small dwelling like a death knell, silencing even the children's terrified whimpers. Eliza, her heart a frantic bird in her chest, squared her shoulders. Her gaze met Silas's, a silent plea for understanding, a desperate act of love. He stood frozen, his hand still on the rifle, torn between his instinct to protect and her unwavering resolve. He saw the profound sacrifice in her eyes, the sheer courage it took to offer herself to the wolves. With a choked gasp, he moved to block her, but she was quicker, a sudden burst of adrenaline propelling her forward. She threw open the door, stepping out into the harsh morning light, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Outside, a group of men stood, their faces grim and hardened by suspicion and fear. They were from Dry Waters. Their eyes narrowed, their weapons clutched tightly. Leading them was a tall, gaunt man, Elder Thorne, his face a mask of self-righteous fury. He saw Eliza, not as a woman, but as a living symbol of their town's misfortune, the curse they believed she carried. But standing slightly apart, his features obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, was another figure. It was the man her eldest son had spoken of, and in his hand, Silas saw it clearly now, was Eliza's late husband's rifle, unmistakable in its unique design. This was Thomas, a distant cousin of Eliza's deceased husband, a man known for his cunning and his avarice, who had always coveted the small patch of land Eliza's family owned. Thomas stepped forward, a sneer twisting his lips. "She brings sickness wherever she goes," he declared, his voice cutting through the crisp mountain air. "She drove her husband to an early grave, and she brings the curse upon us all." His words were a calculated poison, meant to sway the fearful men of Dry Waters, to reinforce their superstitions. He sought not justice but possession of Eliza's meager inheritance, and her permanent removal. The revelation of his direct involvement, the stolen rifle a damning piece of evidence, painted a far more insidious picture than simple village fear. Thomas was manipulating their superstition for his own greedy ends. Silas, witnessing the deceit, felt a cold rage ignite within him. But Eliza, her eyes flashing with a new, fierce determination, stepped forward. "I bring no curse," she stated, her voice clear and strong. "You banished me for your own fear, for your own weakness." She pointed a trembling finger at Thomas. "And you, Thomas, you speak of curses, but you are the true plague. You stole my husband's rifle, did you not? You whispered lies in the ears of the elders, hoping to claim our land for yourself." Her words, unexpected and bold, caught the men off guard. A ripple of doubt, a flicker of suspicion passed through the group. As the confrontation escalated, Silas, seeing his moment, acted with cunning. He had spent days observing Thomas's movements, learning his habits. He knew Thomas was a man of the lowlands, accustomed to flat ground and open spaces, wary of the treacherous mountain terrain. Just as Thomas lunged towards Eliza, Silas let out a piercing guttural cry, a sound that mimicked the exact terrifying roar of the mountain bear they had faced days earlier. The sound echoed through the valley, amplified by the surrounding peaks. Thomas froze, his eyes widening in terror, his mind reeling from the sudden, unexpected sound. He instinctively looked around, his body tensing, expecting the massive beast to burst from the tree line. In that split second of fear-induced confusion, Eliza acted. With a swift, unexpected movement, she wrenched the rifle from Thomas's grasp, her small frame surprisingly powerful in her desperation. The stolen rifle, a symbol of his treachery, was now back in her hands. The men from Dry Waters, witnessing Thomas's cowardice and Eliza's courage, began to waver. The bear's roar, the undeniable proof of Thomas's deception, and Eliza's defiant spirit, shattered their preconceived notions. One of the men, an older farmer named Jebediah, who had always harbored a quiet respect for Eliza's family, stepped forward. "She speaks the truth," he declared, his voice gaining strength. "Thomas, you always were a snake. This land belongs to Eliza, and you stole her husband's rifle." His words ignited a spark of rebellion among the other villagers, who, though fearful, were not entirely devoid of conscience. The situation turned swiftly. Thomas, exposed and cornered, dropped his rifle and made a desperate dash for the woods. But Silas was ready. He had set a concealed snare, disguised by pine needles and snow, near the old hunting trail where Thomas had been spotted. With a yelp, Thomas stumbled, his leg caught in the trap, bringing him down in a tangled heap. He screamed, not in pain, but in sheer terror, as Silas, calm and menacing, stepped out from the shadows. The confrontation ended not with bloodshed but with exposure and the subtle, strategic use of knowledge. The threat was neutralized, not by force alone, but by a combination of Eliza's unwavering moral courage, Silas's intimate understanding of the wilderness, and the unexpected awakening of decency among the villagers. The men from Dry Waters, now stripped of their superstitious fear and confronted with undeniable proof of their own leader's avarice, looked at Eliza with new eyes. They saw not a cursed woman but a survivor, a protector. They helped free Thomas from the snare, though not without a few stern words and a clear message that his treachery would not be forgotten. As they prepared to leave, the fear in their eyes was replaced by a quiet shame and a grudging respect for the woman they had sought to exile. The main threat was defeated, but the mountain, always demanding, reminded them that the world remained a place of constant challenges, its lessons endless, its justice often swift and brutal. As the men descended, leaving Thomas bound for the nearest town to face justice, Silas and Eliza knew that while this battle was won, the journey of building a life in the wild was far from over. There would always be new storms, new challenges, but now, they faced them together. 9 months had passed since the men of Dry Waters, humbled and shamed, had retreated back to their valley, leaving Thomas to face the slow hand of justice. The mountain, a silent witness to their cruelty and Eliza's courage, had since settled into a profound, enduring peace. The scars of winter had faded, replaced by the vibrant greens of spring and the lush bounty of summer. Within Silas's cabin, now unequivocally their home, the echoes of past hardship had given way to the soft rhythm of a thriving family. The silence, once heavy with solitude, was now filled with the gentle hum of activity, the quiet laughter of children, and the steady beat of two hearts united. Eliza sat by the open door, mending a tiny garment, her fingers moving with familiar grace. Her face, once etched with the lines of fear and exhaustion, was now soft, radiant with a quiet contentment. Her body, gracefully rounded, bore the unmistakable sign of new life, a visible testament to the complete healing that had taken root in their sanctuary. She was visibly pregnant, carrying not just a child, but the promise of a future, a living symbol of their newfound hope and the unbreakable bond they had forged. Silas, no longer the solitary figure, moved with a newfound lightness. He was often seen with the eldest boy by his side, teaching him the intricate art of trapping or the subtle whispers of the forest. The boy, his eyes bright with intelligence and a deep-seated respect, absorbed every lesson, eager to become as capable as his mentor. The other children, robust and sun-kissed, explored the woods with a boundless energy, their fears replaced by the joyous curiosity of children truly at home in the wild. The cabin, once a stark refuge, now held the warmth of hearth and heart, its walls resounding with the sounds of a true family, a testament to the fact that a home was not merely a structure, but a feeling of belonging, a fortress built of love and shared purpose. One clear autumn afternoon, as Eliza sifted through a forgotten pouch of her mother's keepsakes, she found an old, intricately stitched sampler folded and tucked away. Unfurling it, she discovered a detailed embroidery of the very mountain flower depicted on their lockets, beneath which was a verse in faded thread. It spoke of a prophecy, passed down through generations of her mother's mountain kin. When the lone wolf finds his pack, and the lost lamb finds her shepherd, the ancient root shall bloom anew, and a new lineage rise upon the peaks. Eliza stared at the words, a profound understanding washing over her. Her lineage, she realized, was not just connected to this mountain, it was destined for it. The ancient tale was not merely a quaint family legend, but a living prophecy, fulfilled in their union, promising a legacy rooted deep in the heart of this land. Her act of sacrifice, her courage in the face of exile, had not only saved her children, but had inadvertently resurrected an ancient line, forging a powerful, enduring legend for generations to come. The world beyond the mountain continued its relentless turning, but within their sanctuary, a new truth had taken hold. Dry waters, ravaged by harsh winters and dwindling resources, had begun to wither, its former cruelty now a distant, hollow echo. The story of Eliza and her children, and the silent, unwavering protection of the mountain man, had spread through the whispers of traders and trappers, transforming from a tale of banishment into a legend of redemption. It was a silent, powerful testament, resonating across the vast, untamed West. Silas, the unlikely hero, had proven that true strength resided not in isolating oneself, but in extending a hand to the exiled, in choosing compassion over indifference. He had shown that the purest form of humanity was found not in the rigid laws of men or the fragile confines of towns, but in the boundless courage to protect, to heal, and to build a home where none was expected. The mountain, once a symbol of his solitary sorrow, had become the fertile ground for his greatest joy. For Eliza, the wilderness was no longer a place of exile, but a sacred haven, a place where her broken spirit found not just solace, but profound purpose. Her children, raised under the vast open sky, were a living testament to the truth that family was not defined by blood alone, but by the fierce loyalty, enduring love and shared sacrifices that knit souls together. The true home, they had discovered, was not a place on a map but a feeling, a deep, abiding sense of belonging forged in the crucible of adversity, built one loving act at a time, high in the wild, majestic heart of the mountain. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel